After 30 years of serving as an educator, designer, coach, and speaker, supporting a wide spectrum of transformative, innovative projects, Christian Long founded Bonfire to help leaders, teams, and organizations honor the shared human experience of designing future possibilities together. I've cherished him as a friend, his spirit, and just his mind ever since. So welcome to the podcast, Christian.
Welcome back to the Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world.
Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome in. So glad you are back. We're in season 9. Like 260 some episodes now, which is crazy to think. But if you are new to the podcast, welcome in. So glad this continues to grow and spread, and so glad you are here. If you just Google my name and a bunch of different topics, you'll see there's 260 different episodes on leadership and culture and all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for something, you will find it. If you are one of the OGs that have been with us from the very beginning of this podcast, and so glad this continues to add value to your life and your work. My commitment to you, as always, is I hope that wherever you're listening and however you're listening to these conversations, it breathes a little good oxygen into you, and it helps you step back and think about the temperature you're trying to set in your life, in your work. And that's the point. So thanks to everybody for being here, and I hope today's episode does just that. I have to say the requisite things. If you haven't subscribed yet already, please do. Rate the podcast, of course, 5 stars. Authentic review in your own words helps the algorithms find it and amplify the messages. And of course, every time you share an episode that resonates with you, that helps it reach somebody else and spread even further into the world. So I appreciate everybody that takes the time to get to do that. I am very excited to invite in my guest for today into this chat in just a minute. After 30 years of serving as an educator, designer, coach, and speaker, supporting a wide spectrum of transformative, innovative projects, Christian Long founded Bonfire to help leaders, teams, and organizations honor the shared human experience of designing future possibilities together. Prior to Bonfire, Christian served many roles, a few to name: Chief Growth Officer for Think Learning Studio, Principal in Research and Strategy for Roto, and many more. Christian received his master's in education from Harvard, undergrad at IU. He's a Hoosier and is a father and a husband. He and I connected years ago. I can't even remember how many years it's now been. A fellow educator, actually, as I was reflecting on this, connected us, Matt Peterson. Shout out to Matt Peterson out there, who was the one who said you ought to know each other. And we got together for coffee one day, and I've cherished him as a friend, his spirit, and just his mind ever since. So welcome to the podcast, Christian.
Jace, it's a pleasure anywhere to be with you.
Buddy, it's fun. Every time I get to be with you, I'm excited. You are your mind always amazes me, and it's always just great to be with you. And I leave the conversation feeling better. So awesome to have you on the pod and share you and what you're up to with listeners.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Jace.
Yeah, man. So tell all of us a little bit more. I know, of course, because you and I have been talking about this for a while, but tell us a little bit more about Bonfire and what, in this recent phase of life, what's got your interests, your passions, what's going on right now in that wonderful brain of yours.
Yeah. I mean, Bonfire gives me an excuse to think about the people in the room as much as the project that brings us all there. And, I think anyone that cares about their partners and colleagues, teammates, or their clients, or whatever the community is they're serving or working with, does by default care about the people in the room. But I don't know that the design brief or the proposal or the contract calls that out. I don't know that we're always afforded an opportunity to linger there. We might really be thoughtful about the meetings. We might be really creative and intentional about workshops and development of process and how we storytell and bring a community or a team, an organization into the mix, and then obviously how we're trying to serve the end goals of a project. But I've just been thinking more and more in the last couple of years about the fact that so often the way in which we relate with one another is in addition to the work. And I thought, is there a way that at least hold my own feet to the fire? Could I be more intentional and accountable? And if I had to lean one way or the other, I want to care more about the people than the project. And that that's obviously could be a provocative statement because we're only there because of the work. And it doesn't matter what one's role might be. But I think at this point in my life, in my mid-50s, I want to double down on people, and I want the work to be the invitation, but not necessarily the limitation of why we're together.
Yeah. And so what you and I have always talked about too is the world that we're living in right now too, is that oftentimes we as humans are isolated. And certainly within organizations, we're isolated, where we might be doing the work, but we might not have that level of connection with the people that we're working with. And yet statistics, research, everything tells us that what people want is connection. Absolutely. And what they want to do is feel like they're a part of something and feel like they are whatever it is that they are endeavoring in and toward is bringing out the best in them. And yet, so they're looking for it. And so I know if you would say a little bit more about some of the things that you're beginning to offer and or bring together to help create that level of connection and what you're seeing people are kind of thirsty for.
Yeah, I thank you for focusing on connection. I'd like to think this isn't a post-COVID craving. I'd like to think this isn't just a modern workforce like recognition that at the heart of it, we need to be in company with others. We need to be in relation. We need to be heard and felt and known, not just nearby. And we need to do that for one another. So it's not just what I need. It's really recognizing the privilege of doing that for others. I think on one end of the kind of bonfire side of the house, I'm working with a group of community development leaders across the state of Ohio. So, their professional calling is to serve their local communities. That can be non-for-profit focused on education and churches inside a particular neighborhood. That can be more at a statewide real estate development, economic kind of engine level, and working with a statewide agency that was really curious about how to support emergent leaders. So if you can imagine that 28-year-old, 35-year-old executive director, she might be in her first ED role, and she is highly capable in terms of her team's needs and sort of what got her to that opportunity to serve and lead. But she may not have a network of peers and other organizations that she can readily tap. She's 5 years in, 8 years in. Or there may be somebody who is working so doggedly and diligently inside a particular community that the ability to look at how are others across the state of Ohio serving a similar community, or what might be an outlier concept or program or funding model that might they could maybe leverage. So in that case, I've been brought on to help them design a multi-month journey for those leaders. So on one level, it sort of rhymes with a typical leadership academy. So there are plenty of these, right? But the question isn't what are the explicit skills that all leaders need to know. We'll certainly take advantage of some of those, but really, how can we help them develop networks that are just in time, adaptable for them? And more importantly, how can the wisdom of these emergent leaders become core content as opposed to we're trying to level them up constantly and trying to look at that relationship. And I think at the heart of it it's about being connected, going back to your point, and how can these leaders leverage a leadership program in order to build community so that they can serve others. And so on one level, that's a program that we're just launching. In fact, I've got a meeting in 2 days to kick off that project. On the other hand, I am working with groups of men, really diverse array of men. But that's the one component they have in common is they identify as being male. And we go out into the wilderness and we try to engage natural settings because there's real power and beauty and wonder and challenge. And we combine physical experience, meaning just sometimes as simple as going on a walk in the woods. But we can certainly, we can be more creative than that as well. But how do we align that with conversations and the ability to listen to one another? And I think at the essence of it, it's how can we invite men to be present for one another so they can be present for others? And so we're literally going out on trail, and we're literally, whether it's summer and we're dealing with humidity and we're dealing with elevation, or we're out in the middle of a forest and on a winter day, we're using the trail to spark curiosity in one another, to use the trail, not how many miles and to accomplish the goal, but instead is what does the trail provide for us, and what does the environment invite us to notice? So what can we wonder? What can we notice? And what happens if we do that together? And some of it's playful. Some of it is deeply introspective. Some of it is like, wow, that hill. We got up that hill. And Jason, you've been on one of these. You've come on a half-day experience with a group of about 11 other men. And on some level, it's simple. On another level, there are layers. And it's an invitation to not take for granted who we are, how we show up, and what we have around us that we can take advantage of together.
Yeah, no, I have been on one. And what I would say is my experience with it is that that simplicity is part of the beauty of it. Is I see this within the context of organizations all the time, is that people in general, and certainly men, are thirsty for connection. And so,
absolutely.
And oftentimes in an organizational setting, all of us humans are wanting there to be more meaning to what it is we're doing. Yeah. And then outside of that, and what I saw, especially as a part of the experience with you, was not only men that were thirsty for talking about life, but they were able to talk beyond just work. They were talking about the other relationships and the certainly layers, as you said, to their life, and were thirsty for it. And so creating that kind of safe space, and then with people that didn't even know each other,
no, not
and
at all.
All of a sudden, the amount of people that were opening up and sharing and asking really, really provocative questions was really fantastic.
Yeah, Jason, I think that what you just hinted at, the prioritizing asking the question as opposed to providing the answer. Yeah. And if you and I are together and you ask me a series of questions and all I do is respond, and in some respects being invited to a podcast or a conversation, it's easy to settle in where I'm waiting for your question. But if I don't turn that around, then we haven't found kind of found our path together, right? We're just shy of the thing. And so I'm curious, when you were, on one level, you were there in support of me. You were investing in somebody as I was building this. You were also there as a participant, one of 12 guys. No doubt. You have familiarity with the woods, but you didn't know that trail. Mm-hmm. I think you recognized maybe one other guy, but you certainly didn't know the group. I'm curious, what did you notice about the act of people inquiring about others, or the kinds of questions that ended up moving a conversation as opposed to just closing a point?
Well, I'll answer that in two ways. One, something I've always noticed way back to what my old, summer camp days is, running a summer camp for kids out in the woods, doing this kind of thing is what I noticed at an early age is that men in particular, but again, humans in general, but men in particular, that we don't always get, quote unquote, trained or in situations to really share authentically and honestly with other people. Absolutely. And so that's a real opportunity for, and when we think back to the best coaches we ever had as kids, or the best teachers, or the best whatever, it was those people that showed us and modeled that guys could talk to other guys and could open up and all that, right? Then when you see adults who are very successful and wonderful in whatever they do, you still see that thirst. And you saw what I saw, again, without knowing anyone, is people willing to share what was on their heart and what they were thinking about. And they were wrestling with all the normal human stuff of
course,
career stuff and job pressures and relationship pressures and kids and health and all of the stuff. And yet what I walked away wondering, which once again, I hope in the best organizational cultures, we're creating space for people to really create true connection. And I've seen it and do believe that is alive. However, I walked away feeling like there are so many people out there where they don't know where that outlet is, and they don't have a space to kind of wrestle with and move through that. And so I think there's just great power and need for people to be able to process that, to ask questions, and to see that they're not alone. But let's take a break. Let's pause for a second, and we'll be right back. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate that. I think you're right. There's a thirst. There's a hunger, there's a craving to be involved in experiences that are authentic, to know that when you arrive, the people aren't just pulling up a seat or aren't just being polite, aren't just recognizing, you bring an intellect or backstory, but they will be different as a result of your arriving, that they will grow as a result. And what I'm finding, and I'm thinking about 30 years of having the privilege of being in classrooms and conference rooms and conferences and such, and just how powerful it is when somebody asks the right question. And I think on some level, I'm tempted to want, through this process of Bonfire and these different kinds of experiences, to really nail the right question. And there's a whole skill set, right? There's lots of research, there's lots of intuition. There are just people that just know the right time to ask the right question. What I find is it's much like you and I, that question's in relationship to something else. And what I'm testing, don't pretend to be an expert, but what I'm starting to trust and risk is the coupling of creating space for the question, and that becomes a cultural norm as much as like an indicator, with the willingness to not solve for someone else. And so in essence, if I ask a question, Jason, how's your day? Simple things, right? Basic table stakes of reconnecting. And you say, I'm doing all right. And I can tell there's something, right? Maybe you're on the verge of something really exciting. Maybe you're feeling a little weighted back. And you say something. And my desire to empathize with you, my desire to let you know I get it, or my desire to be like, oh my God, me too. So often that question is followed up by my also giving a recommendation, saying, hey, me too. Like, and it comes from a good place or it comes from an intellectually logical place. What I'm noticing when I bring a group together, and sometimes it's in a workshop setting, but I'm that to me isn't where my heart is as much these days. It's more, again, I'm being on trail or these kind of real world experiences with professionals and folks, is really asking attendees and participants. Not only are asking questions going to be critical, like your ability to ask a question is going to carry all of us forward, but your ability to not follow up with a recommendation is going to be just as powerful. And what I'm sensing is when somebody says, tell me more, we all end up going further together. And there's a physiological, like an emotional, a psychological shift. And there's a very tactical, strategic thing that I think follows as well. And so thank you for bringing up this idea of being in community, feeling connected. And if questions are critical to that, I think the second balance is the ability to not rush to solve or confirm, but instead to stay a little longer in that liminal space. And I think sometimes it's just as simple as saying, hey, tell me more.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the power also in just not having an agenda that and yet we get, the old, in the metaphor going on a hike in the woods is that you wander down the path and you find your way out, but you might not know exactly where you're going. And that happens. You wrote a newsletter, you have a newsletter that you write, and you wrote one recently that resonated with me, but you were talking about the feels like temperature and talking about the outdoors and being outside. And I woke up today in Columbus, Ohio, and it said it was 14 degrees outside, and they quickly followed it up with, it's 14 degrees, but it feels like it's 5.
Nice.
And so I thought of you, and certainly the synergy between this idea and thermostat cultures and setting the temperature and what is the real temperature and all of that. But say more about this idea of feels like temperature and why this kind of idea seemed to rise up for you.
Yeah, the practical inspiration for that piece was I had gone on a solo hike, and it was cold. It was one of those, I don't know what the combo was, but very close to that kind of numerical irony that you just mentioned. It was cold, but the felt like was even colder. And so I chose to drive to a trail. I chose to gear up. I chose to block an hour and a half, 2 hours of my evening aside. And I got out of the car. And despite all the preparation, despite having the right gear on, despite having hiked many, many miles in the cold, grew up in Maine, Colorado, love winter, I got out of the car and something like subconscious emerged, and it was, get back in the car. You don't want this. You're not ready. I didn't literally use those words, but you know the feeling, right? And there's that moment of like that tipping point. Do I hesitate, not quite start the hike, kind of linger by the car, or do I just forge ahead? And I made the decision to go, and I would have been disappointed in myself, and I'll leave it at that. But what I started to notice really quickly, I started to just think, as I was walking down the trail, I wasn't listening to a podcast or music, and I could hear the crunch of the leaves, and there was crispiness because they were icicles in the leaves, and it's getting dark. I'm intentionally hiking at sunset and twilight, and I started just let my mind started to go, and I started to think about like how often in life am I like gearing up because I'm worried about like a moment. I'm getting ready to get on stage. I'm wondering if I'm prepared for a thing, waking up in the morning, getting ready to go to work, whatever it is. And I'm gearing up, right? I'm sort of like going through a checklist. I'm putting on the right clothes, metaphorical or real wise. And then if anything is shy of that, if anything is harder than that, all of a sudden I'm like, God, I don't know today. I don't know if today's going to go well, or imposter syndrome, whatever it is, just a shade of doubt.
Yep.
And it's, you have to, all of a sudden you have to like, you kind of white knuckle a little bit. And I just think, whether we're on trail or we're walking into a meeting, right? We're getting ready to present something we've put a lot of time and attention into, but something that feels like temperature changes. And so at the beginning of that hike, so let's say it's 3 or 4 miles, let's say an hour and a half go by. At the beginning, I felt all of the negative. I felt cold. I felt underprepared. I felt nervous. I mean, all kinds of primal stuff that I wouldn't admit if I didn't feel comfortable, in connection with you, right? But after a while, things changed. My heart rate changed, my cardiovascular, like I unzipped slightly. So my body was changing. But I think what was more interesting to me is spiritually and psychologically, I was in a different temperature zone. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that attitude, disposition, mindset is the delta, right? Yep. There could be other things, but generally the mental delta is attitude, is mindset. It's like the difference between I have to do this and I get to do this. Yep. And when I was writing about that, I wasn't trying to make a big point philosophically or based on research. I was just thinking out loud. I appreciate you and others reading, giving feedback. So I'm curious about that because you've obviously written in great detail about, a thermostat culture and the difference between, what the temperature is versus being somebody that can affect or impact the temperature. And you work with organizations of all kinds where culture is that delta. So I'm curious what it sparks for you and what question it leads you to think about.
Yeah, no, one, I thought it was really well done, as I told you, and I immediately, of course, made all those connections to stuff that I've worked on and talked about within teams and organizations and speeches and all that kind of stuff. Is one, it made me, though, I just to your very point a minute ago, it made me personalize it and think about particular moments when did you feel like you were prepared, and when then did you feel like, the temperature out there maybe is a little different than what I was anticipating. And I can think about personal experiences with that. And certainly to the point of, when I talk about taking the temperature is one thing. And so to walk out, and again, the feels like temperature, be like, oh, wow, it's colder than I thought.
Yeah.
And then to say, well, what does it look like for me to set the temperature? Mm-hmm. And so personally, what is that? What is my adjustment to that? And is my response going to be, all the normal things that you identified? Like, am I going to walk away? Am I going to get back in the car? Am I going to whatever? Or is there a personal response? And so I thought about it from the personal side of things, in that piece. But then I also think about it from the organizational side of things, is that there are a lot of places that they talk about the temperature being a certain temperature in their culture.
Right.
But then when people get in there, they experience a different temperature.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, the fancy term in culture shaping is cultural dissonance, that people feel this, our words and our actions are not in alignment. And so we say the temperature is this in our culture, but that's not really what people are feeling. Yeah. And yet still it comes back to that. So what are we intentionally together going to do to set the temperature? And I can only control what I can control personally, just as you can. But together, if we are part of a team or organization, well, what are we going to do then to impact that? And so the strategy, the intentionality around, well, what do we want it to be? Yeah. And how are we going to face those elements? And the last thing I'll say, and I'll shut up about it, is I think it really is helpful for us approaching things from a mindset of resilience. That what happens when we in our personal lives or teams, organizations hit a point where the trail is pretty rough. It's cold today. And how are we going to respond to that? And it helps us begin to flex some of those muscles.
Jason, I'm not making the question up in my head in this moment, but I realize I haven't really asked it of anybody, or at least not in the way it's coming up today. So I'm going to ask you, and I'd love to think aloud with you about it. So I've been thinking a lot about the idea of systems that, whether you read James Clear, Atomic Habits, or, you go back to Six Sigma, or I don't care what Kaizen, I don't care what the system is. It can also be super intuitive. I think there's an inherent kind of mental paradigm, a craving to be able to make things efficient so things run as predicted, right? And you can think of that economically, you can think of that just taking away friction. And so what I'm wondering about hearing you say that is the difference between setting the temperature so that we can be efficient versus almost embracing the tension, embracing the friction. And like, as a person, like, I am so stoked to be with you right now, Jace, but I absolutely wish I were in the same room with you. Yep. And so there's a little bit of a temperature, it feels like
Yep.
is kind of between, right? And that's a very simple example, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the aspirational desire to get temperature just right, to read the room, to set the conditions and expectations for a team or a project, versus how do we embrace the imperfect? How do we actually say, listen, part of me feels really intentional. I'm ready to get some things done. Part of me, though, I've got this lingering thing with like my kids back at home, and I'm feeling the weight of a kid going off to college in less than a year. And I can be in both places, but if I only am setting temperature for I'm going to knock it out of the park in this meeting, right? I'm just going to be hyper intentional and focused. I'm not really fully present, no matter how present I may be, or the temperature may be right, but so I'm fumbling as I'm thinking about this, but I'm wondering, because you work with so many leaders and founders and just, folks who have done it for decades and now sit in a position of comfort because they're not panicking about every decision. They kind of know, it works out. So I'm wondering where for you is that distinction between how do we get the temperature right or set the cultural terms so there's alignment, and we're human beings. Like, our interactions are messy. Our ability to navigate and sense make, we're never going to get the temperature just right. So would you kind of help me think about that, or maybe kind of educate me on what you know as true?
I'll give you my thoughts.
Okay.
And it starts with that we're all imperfect. And what I would say is, and again, all of us as individuals and every team and organization on the planet is imperfect. And what I would say is, my observation is the people that have, I think about it, is it the Marines or it's the Navy SEALs, I think, to say, when challenges hit, you don't rise to the level of your, expectations, but you fall to the level of your training.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And part of that is when I think about cultural architecture or intentional design of the culture, it's not just what is the optimal temperature that we're aspiring for, but it's flexing and the cultural fitness that it requires to be ready that when things don't go well.
Yeah.
And so those seasoned executives or founders or leaders, or even just those people that are in the trenches in an organization, that when something hits the fan and doesn't go well, that the response isn't go back in the car or run the other way. It's, all right, we already know, we don't have to think through what the response we want is, because we've already clear on that. Now we just got to go do that together. And part of that intentionality, again, depending on what kind of culture you're hoping to have, but if the culture you're hoping to have is not purely performance-based, which is what, versus like relationship-based, if the two of them are wedded together, you say the type of people we want to be in crisis is not just worried about our business, but worried about our people and the relationships. And so part of that is we're going to be able to have authentic conversation about what I'm dealing with at home or what you're dealing with at home. But we're also going to say, all right, so what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And we've got this mission in front of us and the challenges we're facing. And those, I think that my language, like as the more we work out culturally together, the fitness of that comes so that when the challenges arise, we're just better prepared to handle them. It doesn't mean we'll be perfect, but we're better. Does that make any sense?
Oh, no, it makes a lot of sense, Jace. I mean, I think you've got a lot of reps and work that you've put in to understand what that means in different domains and different organizations, different settings. And I think you bring a sensibility to it. I think, knowing your career, when you came out of college and to this point, like what you've been drawn to and what you've really invested in and what the kind of ethic of care and the morality and the just the spirit of what you do. So it makes really good sense. So I just like hearing you talk about it. Like it affirms some things that I want to be reminded of. So if we take it out of the interaction of a team or a division or an organization brand, and we just look at one person, let's say you and I have the privilege of being in a conference room together. And whatever the project is or the invitation, there's a thing we're doing, there's a deliverable, there's a calendar, and there are folks in the room that bring expertise. And for whatever reason, that's the team we're working with. But we notice one person in that room. Whatever the specifics are, it's clear that no matter how well intended the team is to strike that balance, to find alignment, this person is out of alignment. And I don't mean they're culpable of something or they're suspect. Like I don't mean they're badly wired. So that person is in the room and that person's feeling a whole range of complexities, right? So A, they're just human. B, like all of us, right? We're all imperfect. So I'm wondering about the alignment. So if we're working with a leader, a single member of that leadership team, and they're out of alignment, highly productive.
Do they know they are?
Okay. So right away. So like if you and I were just kind of spitballing, you know, during a break, one of the questions you'd immediately start thinking about is, are they conscious of that? Mm-hmm. Tell me why that question comes to mind immediately. It seems obvious, but why is that immediately the right question?
Well, because they may be having a different experience than I know. And all I can do is I can use my own emotional intelligence and my social awareness to say, this is what I perceive this person must be dealing with. But clearly I'm only seeing, the duck on the top of the surface. I'm not seeing the little legs underneath. And I don't know what that person might be dealing with it. And I've also been wrong on a number of occasions where the things I thought they were not in alignment with, they actually have been. And so it's a reminder to me to first get curious and challenge my first assumption is, are they not in alignment? And I talk a lot about.
You actually see that as almost a coupling. Like on one level, are they conscious of being out of alignment? But then secondarily, you're challenging yourself. Wait a minute, are they out of alignment?
And if we get to a point where we both feel that way, then and we're affirming that we are out of alignment, is then what is mentionable becomes more manageable. So okay, now let's get curious about what is it? Where is there? Do we perceive to be off on alignment? And I might have my perception, but I want to hear their perception.
So you had talked earlier about connection. So let's just say that's part of the kind of cultural norm we would want in a single meeting, but pervasive in an organization. And you talked about questions earlier. And I think you and I are just, we're both deeply fans of the power of questions, right? And you're bringing, as you said, some emotional intelligence to bear and a little asterisk, like I could be wrong because I've been wrong in the past. So just having the consciousness of that sets you aside as an observer or ally or collaborator, and not all people come into the room with that self-awareness to be aware about the other. So I appreciate that. And you're asking kind of two sides of the question. You're actually asking about your own awareness, not just that observable colleague. So I'm appreciating that. So let's say you and I are getting ready to go back in the room. This is clearly a very vague straw man kind of an assignment, right? Made up in real time. So we're getting ready to go back, and we can both tell that in the moment, everything will be fine. The meeting will run. We only know what's above the water, so to speak, but we have a sense because of other research, other interviews, other things the organization signaled that this person's not alone, and they don't have anything in place to address that. So unless it becomes an issue in the meeting or on the back end of a project, it's sort of just treated as like, life is life and we got to move on. What would we focus on next as a good partner of that group of the organization? Because I think that to me is rarely named in the design brief or the project proposal, or, hey, we need you to come and work with that kind of middle space, that gray space. And yet so often, in my experience, that's where the greatest opportunity for people to be in alignment lies. Would you share, just riff quickly, what's the move? What's the next move in that meeting? We're both coming back in. Is it just an awareness we're going to watch for? Is it something we say? Is it something post-meeting you say to the supervisor, hey, just noticed X, tell us more about Y? What comes to mind for you?
I think it's a great question. And again, I know we're talking hypotheticals here, but what I would say is my first curiosity goes to, again, that individual. So I think individual first, and then I work outward.
Okay.
And
excellent.
so it's, okay, again, are the assumptions right? And using both sides of that emotional intelligence, my own personal awareness and my social awareness, of the other person
Mm-hmm.
to have that dialogue around, okay, does this seem to be bigger? If it feels like it does seem to be bigger, and it feels like more it is a whole team thing, then yes, further dialogue to begin to unearth, is this an issue or is this not? And again, I know we're talking in a fictitious world, but what is this? And again, beginning to try to make it mentionable to see what it is. The power of those kind of individual meetings or team meetings, or at a broader scale, when we do an organizational kind of culture audit with some organizations, where we're looking, and again, deeper than just a survey, but a process to try to understand what's going on. And at the very best of those things, what you're trying to do is take the temperature and try to get you're not going to get a full 100% accuracy of everybody and everybody's brains and heart, but you're trying to take a temperature. But then the real power comes in shifting to say, well, what are we going to do with this?
Mm-hmm.
And what is that response? And whether that's an individual or a team or across an entire organization, then you can start to say, okay, well, what would we need to do to begin to get in alignment?
Yeah. Thank you.
And I believe, and I know you do as well, is that there's a participatory element to that. That it's not just about the leader telling Christian what he needs to do to get in alignment, but there's a participatory, it's a two-way street if it's a one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
It's a team, like, what are we?
Yeah.
And it's across an organization that it's, well, do we have buy-in that we want to find alignment? And sometimes that's the question.
That's a really, I love that. Like, if we had a part 2 of this, I think even the assumption that an individual, a team, a leader wants alignment, because so often organizations or whatever can function at a high enough level out of alignment that if it's kind of like Tiger Woods, the great story about him changing his kind of golf swing. Like, he wanted to be more in alignment, but he actually had to go backwards in terms of execution in order to do that. He had to undo so many things. And I think so often, what we're saying as an outsider, a consultant, a strategist, just a trusted ally, is we're saying we're going to have to go backwards in order to be healthier. We're going to have to get off this path that we trust. We're going to have to take the temperature and recognize the temperature scientifically, so to speak, or what we can measure and what it feels like, which is a little less certain in terms of articulation. I'm going to borrow the spirit of curiosity. You kind of started with early on. So if connection is a default setting, like a non-negotiable default, I concur. The spirit of curiosity, I think leaders who are more curious about their team and those they work with and support and serve, better things are happening. The way we engage each other, like, I hadn't thought about that. Like, where does, I loved what you did. You modeled that. Like, you didn't have an answer, and it is fictitious, but let me work the problem. There's a question that I'm borrowing from somebody that I've started asking folks when we get together. I think there has a value in more of a corporate or kind of workplace setting, but I'm testing it in the more gathering a group of, my program is called Good Men, and we do this thing called Works in Progress, and we kind of go off on trail. And the question that I've been borrowing lately, and I'm curious about your thoughts about it, is, and I think this may be one you've used before, but the question is, what's the question that you wish somebody would ask you?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious if you've been with leaders or teams where they kind of have their version of that question. There could be an engineering approach to that. There could be a, kind of just a human psychology approach. And I'm also curious what you find when people actually answer that question, or whatever version of it.
Yeah, no, it's one, I love the question. And two, I'd say a variation of that I talk with groups all the time about is, again, in this spirit of this, what is mentionable becomes more manageable. And so if we aren't willing to mention it, then we can't do anything with it. Right. And so the question is, what aren't we talking about that we ought to be talking about?
Okay.
And what are we, to be able to ask that individually and say, what is it that you think we ought to be talking about, puts it in the individual's hands. And in a team setting, to ask that, what ends up happening, and especially in lower trusting environments, you start to quickly see everybody looking around me and like, okay, are we going to really say it or not? And it takes some time to really, and you may identify some things, but it may not be until session 3, 4, 5, 7 that the real stuff really comes out. And then in higher trusting teams, you see that they're finally somebody said it. I'm ready.
There's a relief of sorts.
Of like, thanks for asking. Actually, I think the thing we're really talking about, or we need to be talking about, is this. Because as we all know, we as humans, oftentimes the way things manifest, the issue is not the issue. Something happens and we end up debating and fighting about this one thing, but really it's not that thing that we're upset about.
Of course.
It's the issue behind the issue.
Well, and that's true. That's true in the most private of relations, right? In the middle of a marriage, the middle of a family table, like anywhere we're human, that is true.
No doubt.
And I think that's another version of the kind of temperature, and the feels like temperature is that takes place also. We're talking about a thing, but that's not what we're talking about. Right? It's basic marriage counseling kind of insight. And I think there's, if we're trying to resolve a problem, I think there's real value, like executable value in going through those processes. And if we're trying to reposition a brand or an organization, a culture towards a more desirable, I think it's the right thing to do. I'm also, as I'm listening to you, becoming more and more certain that the messy along the way parts, and my phrase when I'm being more public facing is works in progress. And Carhartt has a whole line of clothing they call works in progress. And lots of people just use it as a turn of phrase to storyboard and iterate and prototype and pilot. There's a lot of ways to A/B test, whatever. But the spirit of, if I recognize the thing you're wrestling with is a work in progress, then I also create grace around your ability to not necessarily pull it off the way I need you to, right? It creates a layer of protection or safety, as you hinted at earlier, but also kind of respect. Like if what you're working on is a work in progress, my ability to measure it's more as a feel like temperature, as opposed to we agreed on Tuesday morning and where is it, Jason? The slides needed to be 5, not 8. But if I'm like, no, that was a work in progress. How can I leverage what you bring? Then I'm embodying it. And on another level, if I'm like Jason, but not just Jason, because you did this earlier, but I'm also a work in progress, meaning I see a thing, but maybe it's the way I'm looking at it is the issue as much as what I'm seeing. And I think that duality of how can we meet each other as works in progress, and not just in a clever, like part of a prototypical iterative phrasing, but on a regular basis, can I recognize your humanity? Can I be curious about your perspective? Can I know that there's something beneath the water? Can I hold your perspective and story and presence as a privilege to be with you, even if I misunderstand? And can I recognize that all of us are in service of X, but we are finding our way in real time? And I think in essence that the humility and joy of that allows maybe really healthy organizations do it by other terminology, but and certain leaders do that because it's just how they were gifted. I think it's who you are. I think why so much of your work just feels like an embodiment of you, Jason. It's not just the thing you know about. It is you live and breathe it. And so that's kind of where this conversation is both leading me and maybe underscoring some things that I already feel.
Well, I love it, man. And again, I could go on for days with this with you. And so we're at our time. So what I would invite, or the invitation I'll throw out is we'll do a part 2 of this at some point. And we need to dive more into the
We need to go out in the woods. You and I should do part 2 as we're walking.
That's right. In the woods, works in progress. And because I love that language, and I think it's a really great way of entering that, and also knocking down some walls with people to get to some places is that we are all works in progress. So, buddy, I appreciate your time. I know in the show notes we're going to put all kinds of stuff, but if you want to know more about Christian and check out Bonfire, if you go to bonfire-workshop.com, bonfire-workshop.com. We'll put that in the show notes, though. If you're interested, check him out. If you are nervous to contact him directly, come through me. Or if you say, hey, Jason, I'm thinking about something with my team organization, and this kind of thing seems cool, and man, it'd be fun to do something with Christian or hey, shoot, Jason, you come along. Let's do something.
Absolutely.
You just tell me, contact me, info@jasonvbarger.com or through the jasonvbarger.com website, and we'll make those connections. But I look forward to doing this again, and I'm so glad that you joined us today, Christian. Thank you.
Man, I appreciate you, Jason. Thank you. This is great.
Well, cheers to everybody out there, and thanks for listening. I hope this gave a little oxygen to you, helped you think about the temperature you're hoping to set in your life, even if the feels like temperature is scary or nervous in some way or whatever that is, to think about, well, what is the temperature you want to set, and how do you get curious about things and ask questions and start to wonder about the people around you and the connection that we can make with everybody along the path. And I think when we do that, we may just stumble our way into some solutions and some things that are great for everybody involved. So thanks for listening today. Again, I hope you'll go back, check out old episodes, subscribe, rate, review, all the stuff that you got to do, and share this if it's meaningful with other people. And the last reminder I'll just have for you is to step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.